My name is Katherine Graebner. I am a foreign languages and literature major with an Italian concentration, and I am working on the project Papal Politics and Public Opinion in 17th Century Rome under Dr. Fabio Battista in the Department of Modern Languages and Classics. Today, I will be discussing papal power, its extent in mid-17th century Rome, the process for transitioning the power from one pope to the next, and what those vacancies looked like. I will then talk about the genre of pasquinades and how they relate to the expression of public opinion during those vacancies, and I will conclude by talking about my future work that I will be doing on this project. In mid-17th century Rome, the Pope was both a religious and political figure. From a religious standpoint, the Pope was the head of the Roman Catholic Church and the Bishop of Rome. Politically, the Pope was the Prince of the Papal States. As the Prince of the Papal States, he had a lot of duties typically associated with a political leader. For instance, he was responsible for maintaining and expanding his territories. He wanted to keep the people content and prevent rebellion, so he would feed them in Rome. He enacted taxes on his people, and he sponsored civil projects to beautify the city of Rome. With all of these responsibilities, the Pope had a lot of political power, and so the transition of power from one pope to the next was an important process. And that process was the conclave, which is a gathering of cardinals at the Vatican to elect the next pope. So when a pope died, a period of 10 days would be allotted for mourning and grieving the pope's death. Also, cardinals who were not in the city of Rome would use that time to travel to Rome. On the 10th day, the cardinals would attend Mass, and in the evening they would proceed inside the Vatican, and visitors would be allowed there. At a certain point, the guards would escort all the visitors out of the Vatican, and they would close the doors and lock them. At that point, the cardinals were supposed to start praying and discussing who they would elect as the next pope, and this was supposed to be done secretly and without contact with the outside world. However, in actuality, there was a lot of communication that occurred among political factions. Since the Pope had so much political power, foreign countries were very interested in who was going to be the next Pope. In particular, France, Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire had the right to exclusion, meaning that they could specify individuals who they did not want to become Pope. They also were very interested in influencing who was selected as Pope. And so there were a lot of secret messages sent on carts between cardinals within the Vatican and foreign ambassadors outside the Vatican. All of this communication meant that the conclave could last weeks or months before the next pope was successfully selected. This period between the death of a pope and the start of the next pope was known as the Vacant See, and it was a time marked by high rates of violence. Because the papacy was vacant and the cardinals and foreign ambassadors were focused on the long drawn-out conclave, this lack of law enforcement enabled people to use the vacancy as an opportunity to commit crimes without facing the consequences. For instance, fights and quarrels would break out in the streets and people would be murdered. There were reports of dead bodies laying around the city, and nobles encouraged people to commit ritual pillages against the tombs of deceased clergy. People also used this as a time to commit revenge against their enemies, and robberies occurred more frequently as well. Bandits would hide in the forests outside of Rome, making traveling dangerous, and overall, doctors reported treating about 8 times as many suspicious injuries during the Vacant See than not. In addition to this increase in physical violence, the Vacant See was also an opportunity for people to express negative sentiments about the deceased pope. While a pope was alive, he took his reputation very seriously, and so he would censor writings that were critical of him, his relatives, and the Catholic Church. He would even imprison, torture, and execute the authors of those writings. And so the Vacant See was a time for people to express these usually suppressed sentiments. In particular, I looked at the genre of pasquinades this semester, which are satirical poems that attack powerful figures, such as the Pope and the cardinals. They were affixed to public places around the city. In particular, this statue shown here is the statue Pasquino. It was a common place for them to be posted, but they would also be affixed to other places, such as the doors to St. Peter's Basilica or to the homes of the people that they were attacking. From there, people would see these pasquinades, they would read them aloud to others, they would turn them into songs, they would copy them down, and they would illegally print and sell them. One subject of these violent satirical invectives was Olympia Maidalchini. She had many pasquinades written against her. She was born in the early 1590s, and she was schooled by nuns in a convent growing up. Her father wanted her to take vows to permanently enter the convent, but she refused and married in a wealthy aristocrat. A couple years later, he died, leaving her a widow and a massive fortune. With that money, she married into the Pamphili family. Although the Pamphili family was an aristocratic family, at the time they were suffering from financial hardship and decreased wealth. With her fortune, Olympia Maidalchini saved the Pamphili family financially. Between that and her social life, she had a large influence on the family, including her brother-in-law, Pope Innocent X. When Pope Innocent X during his papacy, she continued to have a great influence on his career. She would visit him daily, and she received many favors, such as her female relatives having marriages arranged for them, her male relatives being appointed to public positions, and herself being named as the beneficiary in his will. A lot of public resentment was built up against her and her role. And when Pope Innocent X died, she was exiled and harshly slandered in pasquinades and in other works. This is an example of a pasquinade that was written about Olympia Maidalchini. In general, the pasquinades written about her were very disdainful of her. They attacked her for her greed, criticized her for her role in nepotism, and accused her of using her beauty to obtain power. In the future, in the spring, I will be looking at a primary source document that covers the conclave following Pope Innocent X's death, so the conclave that would have been selecting the Pope to follow him. This primary source document was written in 1655, and this would have been about the same time that the pasquinades were being written against Olympia Maidalchini. So I will be reading this primary source document, which is written completely in Italian, and I will be translating it from Italian into English. I will then be writing annotations for this document to explain the context and add commentary to the descriptions and the events contained within this primary source document. These are my references. And does anyone have any questions?
Thank you, Katie. And since you've discussed the genre of the pasquinade, in 17th century, have you given any thought about, I would say, modern-day equivalents to pasquinades, or ways in which people voice their dissent, their discontent today, as opposed to in several centuries ago?
Yes, I would say that there are a lot of similarities between pasquinades and mid-17th century Rome and between social media today. Because today, if people have opinions or thoughts on current events or really any topic, they can go online to an online forum or to social media and post their opinion there. And then other people who see these posts, if they like them, they can repost them, or if they have thoughts, comment on them and share them. And so there's a lot of similarities between that today and how pasquinades in the mid-17th century Rome were similarly posted in these public places, and then from there widely circulated around the city to others.
Were the pasquinades exclusive to Rome, or were they written in other areas as well?
The pasquinades were written in other areas as well. So they were written in cities around Italy, such as Siena, Florence, Milan, Venice, and in cities outside of Italy as well. They were also not exclusive to the mid-17th century. So for example, verses written against the Medici family in the 1400s have been found from Florence. So no, they were written in other cities too.
What were some of the main themes of the pasquinades about Olympia?
So in addition to the disdain towards Olympia, the pasquinades also contained a general disdain towards religious institutions in general. This collection started and ended with expressing sentiments and wishes that someone would come and take the Rome away from the power of the papacy, even if it was a foreign power such as the Ottomans. Additionally, the pasquinades had a lot of Greek and Roman references in them, as well as sizable connections to and references to Dante, especially his imaging of hell.